Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Book Review Blog. I am your book reviewer, and today we're going to review the Stephen King book, The Eyes of the Dragon. To give you a little background on why Stephen King wrote this book in the first place, I'm going to once again turn to the book, The Essential Stephen King, by Stephen Spignesi, because he wrote in his portion of The Eyes of the Dragon, he wrote a little blurb about why Stephen King wrote this book in the first place. And I thought it was interesting, so I would want to share it with you. It says, when Stephen and Tabitha King's daughter Naomi was 12 or 13 years old, she did not like reading about vampires, haunted cars, pyrokinetic teens, gypsy curses, or reanimated zombies, still dripping graveyard dirt. As a result, she had not found much in her father's work that appealed to her, as did the writings of Piers Anthony, John Steinbeck, and Tanitha Lee, and William Shakespeare. So, what's a dad to do? Especially a dad who is the world's most popular writer, but write something made to order, something that would appeal to his gru-adverse daughter. And so he did. Stephen King wrote this epic fantasy novel, The Eyes of the Dragon, specifically for Naomi, hoping she'd read it and love it. And she did, and she did. So that's a little background of why Stephen King wrote this book in the first place. Honestly, if someone were to come up to me and say, Megan, I've read I've heard your reviews, I'm kind of interested in reading a little Stephen King, but I don't want to read anything scary, right up front. What book would you recommend? I would actually recommend this one, especially if it is like a teenager, because this is a book that kind of appeals most to young adults, as, again, Stephen King wrote it for his daughter, who was 12 or 13 years old. And like they said, his daughter was reading kind of books that maybe people by 12 or 13 started to read, like John Steinbeck and William Shakespeare, that most adults, read or may not have read all of them at the beginning. So this book is very short. It's less than 400 pages. What it is, it's a fantasy novel that is circled around a kingdom, and the kingdom is called Delain. And in this kingdom, there is a king named King Roland, and he has a queen named Sasha. And these king and queen have two sons. Their names are, the oldest one is Peter, and the younger one is Thomas. And the King Roland has a magician named Flag. And so what happens basically is that Flag, who is the king's magician, is very evil. That he doesn't exactly want the kingdom for himself, but he wants to kind of start like an uproar and just to kind of get the kingdom to kind of like fall in on itself, and so I guess maybe he can take over. But in order to do that, there are people that are standing in his way, obviously. And the first one for Flag, who he thinks is standing in his way, is Queen Sasha. Queen Sasha is a young woman. I think when this started, King Roland was like 40 or 50, and Sasha was about 20. So she was very smart, and she kind of saw through Flag and said, okay, this guy is not, he, appears to be nice on the outside, but he's really not on the inside. He's evil on the inside. And Flag understood that Sasha had doubts about him, so he arranged kind of to have her die in childbirth while giving birth to Thomas. So now Sasha has died, and King Roland, who loved Sasha uncontrollably, is forlorn and sorrowful that Sasha has died, and he's left to care for these two sons. And so King Roland lives for a few more years. I believe when obviously when Sasha died, Thomas was a newborn baby, and I believe Peter was about 6. And so they lived all, with like this little family for about 10 years, I'd say. And till about when Peter was about 15. And then Flag decided that Roland should not be living anymore. But instead of Peter taking over, Flag had the idea that Thomas should take over as king. So Flag initially came up with a plan to basically frame Peter for King Roland's murder. And I'm not going to say how it happened, but because I want you to read the book. But it so happens that King Roland ends up dead. Prince Peter ends up being jailed for his king's murder at the top of a very high tower in the kingdom of Delain. And in this tower, the townspeople call it the Needle, because this book has pictures in it. Every once in a while, and the picture that the person drew of this tower, it kind of looks like a needle if you think about it, because it's like a really tall tower with like a teeny little window. And so as Peter is in jail for 5 years, and he knows he's innocent, but nobody believes him. And while he is in prison, Thomas is again the king, and Thomas is not a very good king. He relies too much on Flag, and Flag makes him make bad choices to where, the kingdom isn't exactly in like an uproar of what Flag wanted, but still it's not as good as what it was when Roland was king, and not what it could be if Peter was king, because Peter, was bred to be king. He knew how to be king, and he was ready for it, and the people in Delain knew that Peter would be a good king. So, but with Thomas, they thought, no, he isn't as good of a king as Roland was, or Peter could have been. So, again, Peter is kind of stewing in this cell, and he knows that he has to escape in order to stop Flag from, continuing to have power over Peter and power over the kingdom. So he devises a really interesting plan to escape. And again, I don't want to tell you about it because I want you to read the book. And so that's where I'm going to leave it. Again, it's a very good book, very good especially for young adults, especially now because it seems that young adult books are more kind of fantasy related. Again, it's funny, I keep wanting my husband to read this book because I know that, he really loves like Lord of the Rings, and like the Chronicles of Narnia type fantasy, but unfortunately it's not like that. It's not like people going on a big quest to get something. So unfortunately, if that's the type of fantasy that you like, you won't find it in this book. But again, I urge you to give it a try and to please read it. So anyway, the next book that I'm going to read by Stephen King is called The Tommyknockers. So that's it. I bid you all farewell and happy reading.